Now, I suggested last time that when Bagehot convinced central banks that you are bound to lend freely at a high interest rate in a crisis against good security, and that's your responsibility, and you should bring this up to consciousness and plan to do this. Once central banks accepted that responsibility, they then started to think, how can we avoid the crisis in the first place? And so they invented monetary policy. And it evolved since 1873 to what it is today, or what it was right before the crisis. And I want to start with that normal monetary policy first, okay, as a background, and then we'll get to when things go extraordinary. So the chapter 9 in Stigum talks about normal monetary policy a bit. And if you read through that, you notice that there is a kind of ambivalence about what the Fed is controlling. What is its lever of control? Is it controlling the quantity of money, or the quantity of reserves, or some quantitative measure, balance sheet measure? Or is it controlling the price of money, the Fed funds rate, or something like that? What is its actual tool? Okay. Now, from the point of view of, this is an important thing from the point of view of monetary theory, because there's this view, one idea is that you can understand all there is to know about money with the quantity, with the equation of exchange here, and that's, of course, controlling the quantity of money will control the price level in some way, is the notion. So people who emphasize quantities tend to have something like this in the back of their mind, okay? People who emphasize interest rates, okay, tend to have something more like this money market view of the world that I'm talking about. But I think there's a translation between them, and let me just show you what it is so that you don't get hung up on the wrong things here at the beginning. Remember that I told you at the very beginning, okay, that we can think of the system as a hierarchical one with money at the top and credit at the bottom, and zero here. And the point is that up here at the top is the Fed, at least when we're talking about the domestic monetary system. So you could, and the Fed controls this best money of all, okay, it's its own liability, and so, and it can use that control in some way to influence the balance between discipline and elasticity in the system, okay? I said this maybe lecture 1 or 2, okay? And now you're starting to see how it does this and so forth. So that's, you could say, that's a sort of quantity way of thinking about it a little bit. You might not be using necessarily this terminology here, because usually this measure of M is something like the quantity of money held by households, okay, not the M of the Fed, which is high-powered money or bank reserves or something like that. But certainly it's a quantity, and so a quantity perspective on how the Fed controls, I would urge you to view in this way. Say, you know, if you want to think in quantitative terms, think, well, the Fed is sitting on top of the hierarchy, controlling the best money of all because it's its own liability. That's a quantitative control. On the other hand, if you want to think about price, just in this way, interest rates on this axis and maturity on this axis, and then there's a term structure of interest rates, typically upward sloping here, and the Fed is sitting right here, okay, with the overnight Fed funds rate is what it's pegging at the shortest possible maturity, and that is being is an administered rate, is a policy rate, and out here we have securities prices, long bond prices, and stuff like this. So the market is kind of determining this. Okay, the Fed is determining this. Similarly here, the Fed is determining this, the market is determining credit. Okay, so what we're really talking about always when we're talking about monetary policy is the transmission mechanism from something the Fed controls or its own balance sheet to the larger financial system and then the larger economy. Whether you're using one of these languages or another, you're talking about the same thing. Now, Stigum she talks a little bit about the history of targeting strategies that the Fed used. And I'll just put down a couple of dates here. 1951, the Fed started targeting something called free reserves. Okay? In 1979, this is the famous Volcker Saturday Night Special, started targeting non-borrowed reserves. In 1983, borrowed reserves. And then in 1987, switched to the Fed funds rate. And that's sort of where we've been ever since. Okay. I'm just putting this list here so that you can see that the Fed itself has sort of changed, in a way it's changing its communication strategy. I'm not actually sure that it changed very much what it actually did. Okay, it changed how it explained what it did, or, and I could get into that in some detail. I think it's maybe beside the point for today's lecture, but I just want to alert you that the Fed is constantly messing with what it's paying attention to or what it's claiming to pay attention to. In 1979, that was when Volcker took over, and there was this very double-digit inflation and so forth. And it's often thought that he claimed he was a convert to monetarism, okay, and that he needed to control the money supply in order to control the price level and get this under control. Most people think that he was not a genuine a convert to monetarism, that this was a convenient language for him to hide behind, because he knew that stopping inflation would mean moving interest rates to double digits. And that if he said, oh, we're going to fight inflation, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack the Fed funds rate up to 15%, okay, he might not have survived his confirmation. But when he said, I'm a monetarist, the consequence of that being, I'm going to jack interest rates up to 15%, but we don't say those things, then he was able to do it and stop this inflationary cycle in its tracks.